Hello and welcome to Gardening Australia. We are firing on all cylinders this week, dishing up horticultural inspiration and all the gorgeous greenery you need to get into gear in the garden. Here's what's in store.
The eucalypt has to be one of the most iconic and, of course, important species in the natural landscape. But in a garden, they can dominate. So I'm going to show you some of the very best species to plant to help you grow a garden under gums.
Have you noticed the soil levels in your raised garden beds falling? I have the perfect plan for topping them up.
I'm meeting Dr. Tom Crowett. He's sharing tales from a lifetime of learning about a fascinating plant family, the Araceae, which includes popular garden favourites like philodendrons and anthuriums.
And I'm taking you into the diverse world of conifers and showing you some beautiful specimens from abroad and in Australia, perfect for any garden.
I don't know about you, but around this time of the year when the cold really starts to bite, my mind begins to wander and I daydream about moving to a warmer place where I could grow so much tropical fruit I wouldn't know what to do with it. Well, Jerry's visiting a nursery that may just turn my dream into reality.
Today I'm in Kyogle, about 90 kilometres inland from Byron Bay. It's a very special part of New South Wales, a little subtropical pocket surrounded by spectacular rainforests and protected from cold coastal winds by the Great Dividing Range. I'm here to visit Daly's nursery, an icon of the exotic fruit tree scene in Australia, and I'm excited. It's something I've been wanting to tick off my bucket list.
Greg, when it comes to subtropical fruit, you're pretty much the A to Z. Was that always your dream?
It was. Back in the 70s, I started this nursery with my three brothers, and I just wanted to grow all the different varieties of fruits all over Australia, and we've continued that for the last 45 years. We employ about 20 people that propagate at least 500 different sorts of fruit trees. We do tropicals, subtropicals and temperates, but the big focus is probably on the subtropicals in this area.
And you don't find any barriers to people accepting it in areas where they have frosts?
We probably do, but as I say, I think growing fruit trees is just not about getting the fruit. I mean, that's the side benefit, but it's a passion of trying to grow something outside your sort of climatic range, which I find quite exciting.
Well, I think gardeners just love pushing the boundaries, don't they? It's part of our DNA.
They certainly do, yes.
Back in the 70s, the average Aussie backyard contained little more than a lemon tree. But these days, there's demand for all sorts of exotics. Daly's have grown literally millions of fruit trees and sent them out to hopeful gardeners all across Australia.
Because of our fortuitous sort of situation and climate, we're able to grow a lot of our own trees for production, and we grow them from seed, cutting and graft them as well. We have partner nurseries who supply us, and we grow them on here to a size that we can ship them out direct to our customers, to their door.
So what sort of fruit trees would you grow?
We grow everything, Jerry, from cha-chas to jackfruit, kenistels, dragon fruit. Yep, we've got them all here.
Let's go and see them. You've got my mouth watering.
Sounds exciting.
The 5-hectare nursery boasts several orchards, used to provide cuttings and seed for potted stock, and they're a treasure trove of tropical delights.
Oh. This is a mammy sapote tree. It's a variety called Grey, a selection called Grey. It does well here in the subtropics. It's flowering at the moment profusely all along the branches, and it's still holding fruit from last flowering. Very tropical tree. It's from Central America, but it has adapted well to the subtropical conditions. And they are reaching markets in Sydney and Melbourne from growers up north.
But would you be able to grow this in Sydney?
I think so, yes, yeah. As a seedling, and you could likely get fruit, especially if you've got a microclimate that you are working on, planting with lots of trees to keep the area warm, potentially even inside a polyhouse.
The plant itself is quite decorative and would make a lovely shade tree in the yard, but it's the fruit that's the real prize.
And look at that,
Oh,
glossy, salmon-coloured
isn't that
flesh.
lovely?
There you go, try that.
Thank
It's
you.
a very rich fruit.
It's interesting. It's creamy, but it's not soft.
No, you can bite into it, yeah.
It's sweet, but there's a little flavour of caramel.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
caramel.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
So
delightful.
sweet. Yeah.
It's almost like a pudding, isn't
Oh
it?
yeah, it's so
You
rich.
know?
It is difficult to eat a whole one on your own.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I'd have
Yeah, you
no
could do it,
problems
yeah.
at all.
For brekkie and Mammy Sapoti.
Many Australians are now familiar with the delights of dragon fruit, but some new exciting varieties are now becoming available.
So this is a pink panther. Now it only produces a small to medium-sized fruit, but the flavour is amazing. It's highly productive from a young age and it's compact. You can build these trellises, they don't have to be tall, and the hanging branches are what are going to flower and fruit for you.
Flavour interests me
Would you like-
because normally they're quite sweet and juicy, but they don't have a strong flavour.
Would you like to try one?
I'd love
You
to.
can tell us what you think it tastes like.
Thank you. That's a lovely
Look at that
colour,
colour.
isn't it? That's really a vibrant pink, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't that fabulous? Have a try.
Thank you. You're right.
Peel them too.
It does taste. It's a bit of raspberry in there.
Bit berry flavours, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're
Yeah.
sweet
Mm,
and just delightful, aren't they?
that's very distinctive.
And juicy, like you said. Fantastic. Great one for backyards, isn't it?
Yeah.
Self-pollinating, only need one. Nice and compact.
While dragon fruit can survive outdoors in the subtropics, other exotic fruit trees are coddled in the nursery's polyhouses.
This is our exciting new tropical tree, the achacha from Bolivia. It's started fruiting last year. It's about 7-year-old.
I'd love to taste it.
I'll see if I can find you one. There's one. The way you eat these is your fingernails in like that, pop them apart,
Oh,
and
right.
that's you for you, Jerry.
Thank you. It's tangy, very juicy. It's like a sorbet.
It is, yes.
Yeah, delicious.
We've proved that we can crop it down in the subtropics, even though it's a tropical tree, and I'm sure I'm waiting for someone down in Melbourne to say they've cropped it down there.
There's so much to see and taste here. I'm having a ball. I'll be back with Greg a little later in the show to share some tips on grafting and growing fruit trees.
How does soap work as an insecticide? When soap's applied directly to the body of an insect, it removes its protective waxy coating and also disrupts the cellular membranes, resulting in suffocation. It's particularly effective on soft-bodied insects like aphids, but always apply as directed. If it's too concentrated, it can damage your plants by removing the protective waxy coating on the outside of leaves.
When should I cut back my perennial grasses? Perennial grasses die right off, so it's best to cut them down to just above ground level in winter to get rid of their old dead foliage and make space for their new spring growth. But I love the look of these Miscanthus saraband in winter, so I leave it until late winter, until I see new green shoots start to appear before I cut them back. And that way I can get maximum enjoyment from their movement and their form in my winter garden.
What's an easy edible hedge? Bay trees produce leaves that can be added to many slow simmering dishes. They're also a beautiful evergreen tree that can grow pretty large if you let it. But I keep mine down with regular pruning. And while they're planted fairly spaciously, With that pruning, they'll eventually hedge up. It's such a great plant for a windbreak or privacy screen. And an added bonus is that every time you prune, you get lots of ingredients for your kitchen.
Is there anything more iconically Australian than a eucalypt? But if you got one of these beauties at your place, you'd know that growing in their immediate vicinity takes a bit of technique. Well, Millie has got it nailed.
Gum trees are a feature of so many Australian landscapes. With over 900 species and a wide range of smaller varieties and cultivars, you don't have to live on a large property to enjoy them. But just like any large tree, eucalypts can dominate, and it can be a challenge to grow a garden underneath. They'll compete for nutrients and water and light, and some even release chemicals that inhibit the growth of other species around them. But there are some plants that will survive, and the best place to start looking for them in those species that have evolved in similar conditions. Here in Kalorama, in Melbourne's Dandenong Ranges, is one of Victoria's best native gardens, Karwarra Australian Plant Garden and Nursery. They've got lots of successful gardens under a range of different trees. This is a pretty serious tree for a gardener to contend with. It's Eucalyptus cinerea, and you can see it's incredibly established. But underneath are a smorgasbord of different species, lots of different forms, and some of my absolute favourites. I think the Crowias are a really underused group of Australian plants. There's a few species and, of course, many cultivars. This one is a compact form that's a hybrid of the two. And they're fantastically fresh and gorgeous looking plants. And, of course, these beautiful clear flowers are really, really stunning. They're produced in the cooler months. But one thing that I think is so good about them in a situation like this is that they're actually better in light shade. Not many of them will want to be out in the baking sun, and under a eucalypt, it's not that heavy shade that is often cast by a big, thick European tree. It is actually that kind of dappled light. So these are a fantastic choice for growing under gums. I'm also a massive fan of the wax flowers, the Philotheca. And there's a number of species from arid areas and also some from that moister east coast. So they're really, really adaptable to lots of garden conditions. Now, they have, of course, these gorgeous little wax flowers. But one thing that I love about them is, as members of the Rutaceae family, related to things like citrus, they also have incredibly fragrant foliage. So as you brush past it in the garden, you'll get a whack of that. And of course, pruning it, tip prune regularly to keep it nice and compact, you get to enjoy that fragrance too. Another great genus to consider for growing under gums are the Pomaderus, and many of them have evolved as understory shrubs right up to small trees. And this one is a cultivar. It's a really compact form of Pomaderus obcordatus. Of course, you get this great foliage, a lovely form, and then these beautiful clusters of flowers. Now, in the wider range of species, they vary all the way from whites through into bright yellows, and they have incredible foliage colour as well. So I reckon that's a group that often is overlooked, but is really worth giving a go. One tip is to avoid anything that is too delicate, because over time, debris does fall from the sky. Eucalypts will drop things like bark and leaves intermittently throughout the year. And if it's too deep, it can smother small plants. Now, things like this, it's a lomandra and dianellas, things like that are really, really good at coping with all of that debris. Even if a large branch falls on them, you can remove it and they'll recover. So avoid anything that is too brittle or anything that's tiny and precious. Once you've chosen your plants, There's of course a little bit of technique to really setting them off on their path. And there's a few things you should always do. One is to plant in the milder months of the year. So that might be anywhere from autumn right through winter into early spring if you live in a particularly cold place. It's always a good idea to start with a small plant. It reduces the chance of that transplant shock, and this is really important here. So I'd start with tube stock if you can, or at a maximum that 150mm size. It's also important to position them well. You can go quite close to a trunk because the water will actually roll down that trunk and create a nice little environment. So you just want to have a bit of a fish around to find a spot that is not too congested with roots, no major roots, and then that's where you're going to plant. The soil here is absolutely amazing. And then dig the hole about 2 or 3 times as wide as your pot is, because you want the root system to go out. And then get your little plant, upturn, gentle tap on the bum, little squeeze, and it should come out beautifully. So I'm just putting a little depression around that as I backfill and bring that mulch back over, because I want the water to be directed to the roots in summer. It'll be really dry. And then hopefully this little phobalium, it's a gorgeous shrub, have its perfect life under this gum. If you want to add some vibrancy and nutrients to your garden, you can't go past the holly flame pea. This is Corazima lisifolium. It is such a gorgeous plant. So many people want to grow it, and it is a really beautiful flower. It's this bright orange with pink in the centre. My colleague used to call it unicorn vomit, which I think is pretty apt actually. It's a great common name. So being a pea, they actually have relationships with soil bacteria which help them to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere in their roots. They give themselves a free feed, which means they're really great at growing underneath the competition of other plants. So I think any pea is worth a go if you want something to grow under a gum. Little Tetratheca timifolia, such a beautiful little plant. I hope it goes well. Sometimes gardening is really easy. You've got all the options, you can grow anything you want. But other times it is a challenge. But I promise, you choose the right plants, you put them in at the right time, and you give them a little extra TLC, you can grow a gorgeous garden under gums.
It's easy to take for granted the goodness that comes from the sun and the soil. And when you grow your own, you really notice it. I've been in there a while. Well, veggies, they're good for you and me, but they do take a fair bit out of the soil. Vegetables grow fast, which uses up nutrients and water. This means that over time, the organic matter in your soil breaks down and air pockets become compacted. After a couple of seasons, something happens. The soil level drops. Used to be up around here, now we're down here. And it's particularly noticeable in raised beds like this one. The perfect time to fix it is in between crops. Look at that. That means almost everything's out of here, including this prolific parsley plant. Now, parsley is a pretty deep taproot, so I'm going to have to take as big a root ball as I can. And moving it is probably going to make it bolt to seed, but that can't be helped, so at least it'll be ready for a new crop. To keep your beds churning out great veggies for the next couple of seasons, you really need to add to your soil. There's just one thing to do first. So that the new soil mix doesn't just sit on top of the old layer, I'm giving the old soil a good till so that when the new mix goes in, it all mixes in together. What I'm adding is plenty of compost as well as some aged manure. And of course, some garden mix. Now, it's all high in great organic material that my soil and my veggies will really appreciate. All right, bed's prepped. I kept this little sweet potato ready to keep growing. And our parsley, hopefully kept enough of the root ball, as well as a few punnets of some other family favourites. Because I'm going to plant a whole heap of seedlings into this bed, I think it's going to be easier if I'd mulch it first and then pocket plant after. The layer of mulch will keep that moisture in for longer. There we go. So a heap of seedlings to go into this bed, a few family favourites. Because I'm pocket planting, I've saved a bucket of mix so that each seedling that goes in gets an extra scoop. Always water in a new crop, especially in raised beds. If you have metal-sided raised beds, remember they're particularly prone to overheating in the sun, so always keep an eye on your soil moisture. Look after the soil in your garden beds, and those beds will look after you by nourishing your precious, high-maintenance veggies.
Over the last 10 years or so, there's been an explosion of interest in a particular group of plants, the aroids, and we've welcomed them into our gardens. But for one scientist, this family of plants has been his life's work. Here's Tammy.
Aroid plants are commonly grown in backyards across the country. And because many don't mind low light, they're popular indoor plants too. Just think of the classics like philodendrons and monsteras with their signature holes. Or peace lilies, one of the best indoor air purifiers growing around. All of these plants belong in the Araceae family, and it's a family Dr. Tom Crowett knows better than most. Ready for us to have a look at?
Oh, good.
We're getting a sneak peek into a glasshouse out the back of the Royal Botanic Gardens in Sydney.
Fantastic.
Tom is an internationally renowned aroid expert visiting Australia from the US.
This is Anthurium, a Philodendron postazanum. It has this terrestrial creeping growth.
His official title is Taxonomist and Curator of Botany, and his base is the Missouri Botanical Garden. But what does a taxonomist do?
Someone has to be on the forefront of naming and classifying plants. In effect, study the evolution of plants. So that's what taxonomists do, is they collect, they find out whether it's new, they describe it, they publish it, and then other people can do other work with it. It might be that some of these plants have interesting properties, but you first have to know that it exists and it has to have a name.
Wow, look at these Amorphophallus.
Really magnificent.
I mean, there is really so much diversity in the aroid genus.
Well, Amorphophallus has almost 200 species, so it's a large genus. There are a few in Africa, but most of them are from Asia. There are none of them in South America at all. This is Amorphophallus titanum from Sumatra, and it's a very foul-smelling thing when it's in flower.
What makes them so stinky?
Well, they attract flies because they're pollinated by flies, and flies are attracted to foul scents, dung and rotting meat. That's why they stink so bad. The plant is quite rare in its actual habitat.
One of Tom's great achievements has been championing the protection of aroids and their habitat. He's traversed tropical regions of the world, in particular Central and South America. It's been an adventure, certainly not a life of luxury.
Being in the field is often dangerous. You've got bad roads, you've got bad vehicles, you've got dangerous situations like in Colombia, there were these terrorists that would capture people and hold them for ransom. And getting into places is difficult. Getting back out of the place is difficult. The conditions are nearly always sort of miserable, hot, sweaty. You're having mosquitoes bite you and you have bot flies biting you. But you keep on going because the important thing is to get the plants. We spend, maybe 6 or 7 hours in the field each day, and then you spend an equal number of hours at night pressing plants. I wear the same pants for like 2 months, the same very pair of pants. I don't change pants every day, because if you do, you're doing nothing but laundering.
So you really have to love plants.
You have to be willing to stink.
Over a lifetime, Tom's collected and described over 100,000 plant specimens. So what anthurium is this, Tom?
This is Anthurium colonicum from Panama. It was one that I described a number of years ago.
Of course you did. Tom, this plant looks so exotic, but how will I know if it'll do well in my home?
This is Anthurium vitirifolium, which comes from the upper Amazon region where there's a relatively long dry season. So the plant has shown its ability to withstand longer periods of drought. So because of this, I know that the plant is going to be able to withstand a certain amount of low humidity, which will be present in your house.
So it's ideal to look at a plant's origin or where it comes from?
Yes, it's really important to know where it came from and what kind of a forest it occurred in the wild, especially the amount of rainfall that it gets and whether there's a dry season.
So this one is definitely going to do well in my home then?
Absolutely, unless you water it too much and kill it.
It's quite possible.
Dieffenbachia.
At 85, Tom has no plans of slowing down. Prior to meeting me in Sydney, Tom was with aroid enthusiasts in far north Queensland on the lookout for new species.
So you met this Australian native up north?
Yes, we found it in North Queensland just recently, Rhaphidophora heii.
Is this how it typically grows?
Yes, it's a hemiepiphyte that grows up the sides of trees, or an epiphytic climber. When it's an adult plant, it usually has these spreading branches, but when it is a juvenile plant, the leaves are pressed to the surface. We call those shingled leaves. They're completely flattened onto the surface as if the roof tiles on a house.
And are there many Araceae species in Australia?
Yes, there's quite a number. Australia is less well known and fewer species because it's further to the south. But nevertheless, there are 50 or 60 species in Australia, and some of them are new, like this one.
And worldwide, do you think there's still many that haven't been discovered and described?
Absolutely, incredible numbers of species. They're in the thousands. I believe that there's anywhere between 5,000 and 12,000 undescribed species in Colombia alone.
Wow. Where can gardeners go to get more information about aroids?
The Aroid Society of Australia has members in every part of Australia. I would suggest that everybody belong to this organization and help to pitch in with these volunteer groups that are working with aroids, and to learn more about how to conserve them as well, because some of them are endangered. And also to get plants, because they have many, many species available to them.
From the rare to the readily available, there really are so many aroids to know and grow. And gardeners everywhere can cultivate and care for these majestic plants.
Still to come on Gardening Australia, Sophie goes the chop. Jane introduces some evergreen class. And we meet a jeweller channeling the natural world. Well, Jerry's back for seconds in that exotic fruit paradise. And this time he's getting a behind-the-scenes tour on some of the best techniques for growing these tropical treasures.
For a tropical fruit fanatic like me, being in this nursery is a bit like being in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. And the engine room for all the tropical treats I've been sampling is the grafting shed.
This is probably one of the most important parts of a fruit tree nursery, is propagating grafted trees. And the reasons why we graft is to replicate known good selections of fruit, so they fruit quickly, or you might be taking advantage of a good rootstock. So a seedling tree, you'll have to wait maybe up to 5 to 10 years. A grafted tree, maybe 2 to 4 years. These are Wampies, a Chinese variety of fruit tree. They're quite easy to graft. So what we're doing, growing the rootstock, which is nice and vigorous and healthy. And then we get a sign piece from a recognised variety, I think that's Guy Sam, and make those cuts to expose the cambium, match them up, wrap them up with florist tape, and that's so the sign doesn't dry out. Rick started a few years ago, and it's quite surprising how well it works on young stock, which they tend to dry out quite easily. Yeah.
So after this has been done, they'll go into a special sheltered area?
They'll go into a polyhouse, which is high humidity, for a few weeks, and by that time they're taken and they're sort of pushing away.
How many would you graft in a year?
They do probably 200 to 400 a day. I'd say 30,000 of a mixed variety. I mean, it's just quite a few different varieties we do.
That's quite a significant part of your operation.
No, it's a very important part of fruit tree nursery.
Another important part of the nursery is the experimental greenhouse that's home to a whole community of plants.
This was the brainchild of my son and son-in-law back about 7 or 8 years ago, the biodome.
Wow. What I can see here is a permaculture food forest.
That's exactly what was the idea.
There's a great distinct ground story. You've got vine and fruit trees above it.
The concept is utilising every little bit of space from the lower levels to the mid-levels to the top. So there's got to be a lot of pruning to make it sort of happen. Otherwise, the most dominant species will take over. So it's about pruning and using different layers.
There's a lot of pruning. That means there's a lot of cuttings.
Yes, I had that in mind when my son and son-in-law started this. I thought, well, there's lots of the prunings we can use for cuttings and grafting, so it's worked out well. Win-win.
Hasn't it just? What I love is the fact that you've kept things to what I call a safe picking height, which means you get all the fruit that you want and it's easy to access. And you've done this with a whole range of subtropical fruit nobody would have thought of doing it to.
Yeah.
So this is a living experiment.
Yes, we've got down to -5, -6, so that was the idea. The tropicals we propagate, try to put them in the polyhouse, and it works. So if anyone sort of lives in downtown Melbourne, got a greenhouse in their backyard, it's possible.
What a fantastic example. And everywhere I look, I'm seeing things that I don't recognise, which is such a delight. To keep the trees in his biodome to a manageable height, Greg has an old trick up his sleeve.
This is a jackfruit. I'm going to show you a technique called cincturing or girdling. It's an old technique that used to be used to force trees into fruiting, seedling trees, or to keep trees small. Basically, all it involves is using a tool like this, called a girdling tool or a cincturing tool, and just take a thin slither of phloem tissue off the jackfruit. That will interrupt the flow of nutrients and carbohydrates from the top down to the root system, so I'll slow the root system down, force flowers to initiate and fruit. Simple as that.
Greg is careful not to damage the cambium layer beneath the bark and ensures that the cut is narrow enough for sap to cross the gap.
You don't want to actually cut a big gap out and it virtually ring barks the tree.
Yes.
We all know what ring barking does.
Yes, so it's a very shallow cut.
Shallow.
And it just shocks the tree into thinking it's going to die.
Yes.
And before it dies, it's got to reproduce.
Yes. And the time of year to do it is actually in the growing season, so probably from sort of late spring to autumn, that's the time to do your cincturing. So don't feel shy about doing some cincturing on your vigorous trees.
At a time when retail megastores dominate plant sales, it's great to see a family business not just surviving, but thriving. And the pride that Greg and Pauline take in their work is obvious.
It's a really satisfying thing to be part of building that culture of backyard orcharding, inspiring people and educating them on what they can grow in the smallest balcony or their big backyard. It's just very rewarding.
It has been an amazing 45 years of growing fruit trees, working in an engaged community which fosters nature connection, which is so missing in our modern world today.
Well, one thing I've learnt today is that there's always another fruit that you don't know about but you want to grow. And so thank you for introducing me to new things and new challenges.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah.
When is the best time to prune roses? There are two main groups of roses and they differ based on when they flower. Some only flower once a year in spring, such as the Banksia rose and some old-fashioned varieties. And other roses, like this one, called For Your Eyes Only, repeat flower on and off from spring to autumn. If you need to prune, spring flowering roses should be cut back hard immediately after flowering. But repeat flowering roses like this one need to be pruned every year in mid to late winter. If you live in a really cold, frosty area, prune in August, so the new growth that comes back after you prune doesn't get hit by the frost. I take a fairly simple approach to rose pruning repeat flowering roses. I simply do the 50-50 method. I take about 50% off the height of the plant and then go along and take out about 50% of the canes at the base of the plant. I'm also going to get rid of any spindly, weak or crossing branches. When we prune, we try and prune just past a bud because that's where the plant's going to respond with a new shoot, and ideally at an angle so the water runs off. There you go, keep it simple. The idea of pruning repeat flowering roses is simply to stimulate new growth because these roses flower on new growth.
Winter's a time when the real workhorse plants come out in the garden. Forget the fair weather flowers and the finicky, showy foliage. There's a certain type of plant that just keeps turning up day in and day out. And it brings a calm, austere grace to any space. I'm talking conifers, and Jane's going to show us some of her favourites.
I'm in Ferny Creek in Melbourne's Dandenong Ranges at a nursery that's been here since the 1950s. It specialises in the beautiful and fascinating group of plants that are low maintenance, they look good all year round and come in a dizzying array of colours, shapes and sizes. I'm talking about a large group of hardy plants, conifers. When we think of conifers, it's easy to imagine snow-covered Christmas trees, and many conifers do come from forests in the Northern Hemisphere, so Australians mightn't be so familiar with them. In fact, there are some conifers that grow in the tropics and in many parts around Australia. Conifers are a group of plants that produce seeds in their cones. Many have thin, spiny foliage, and most are evergreen, so they're great for adding greenery to your garden. With over 600 species available, they can add a lot of interest to the garden, with many perfect for smaller gardens or pots. This includes conifer ground covers. They're generally prostrate forms that grow low to the ground. Unlike other ground cover plants, they don't send down roots as they spread out. They grow from one single stem, but they can spread and extend a long way. And because their foliage is very dense and fine and packed together, it means that they're very good in suppressing weeds. You can even plant them in areas to replace lawn where there's no foot traffic. But do watch out, they can spread up to 2 metres wide. So just prune them gently if you need to keep them off the path or whatever. This popular juniper, Juniperus taxifolia variety luchinensis, is a Japanese species. The classic green-coloured foliage hugs the earth and cascades over walls and banks to form a dense, low-maintenance carpet. It does prefer to be planted in a sunny spot. And then there's this golden juniper. It's a cultivar called Juniper conferta all gold, and it has got this lovely hue of gold. It needs the sun to keep that gold colour, but you can see the lovely contrast between that one and this bluey green grey one down here. This is called the shore juniper. It's grown in its natural position on the Japanese coastline, so it would do very well on our seashores. As an added bonus, it has juniper berries, which are used to flavour gin. This is a highly decorative Japanese red pine. It's a beauty because it's very densely packed with fine foliage, golden tips to the leaves, and look at this, it hangs down like a long curtain and it's hiding this retaining wall. It's a very decorative pine. It too prefers a sunny position, but it can handle some dappled light. There's such a huge height variation between conifers, from the low-growing ones right up to the ones that can reach more than 100 metres high, and all those in between, like the shrubs. Shrubby conifers are usually dwarf cultivars, though there are some found in nature. Growing conifers as shrubs allows you to take advantage of their tendency to grow densely, making them perfect for shaping into tight balls or hedging. There are also some that have been cultivated to grow more loosely, ready to be shaped into tiny sculptural trees like bonsai. These are the dwarf form of a very popular Japanese black pine, Yatsubusa, and it's a beauty. It's a cultivar that has got these upright needles, and in the middle of it, just prior to the new growth, this sends out wonderful collection of little white candles. They're really interesting. It's a beautiful plant, dark green foliage, very upright, only grows 1.5 metres high over 10 years. So it's a very slow grower. It would look good in a very ornamental pot or somewhere in the garden. You'll find that some of the cultivars of conifers are really amazing. This one, for instance, is a cultivar. It's a weeping grafted form, and it's a Picea abies, known as a Norway spruce. This is inversa, and you can see what's happened. They've grafted it at the top. It's not going to get any bigger, and it canopies down like that, just falls down like a cascade, and it will just keep it that size. Now, it's a cultivar from Picea abies, which is the very tall tree just down there, and it's the real Norwegian spruce tree. You can see how tall it grows. Very ornamental in any garden, but you need a big space. This one will grow perfectly in a small-sized garden. And for something closer to home, we've got the really distinctive Australian native conifers, the dwarfed ones, something like this. It's very unusual, quite rare. It's a Dicelma archeri. It hails from the alpine regions of Tasmania and is, in fact, quite hard to find outside of this region. This dwarf pine has got tiny scale-shaped leaves and will usually form a 2-metre shrub in the home garden. It's not very fussy. It can handle frost and full sun or shade as long as it gets enough water during spring and summer. Another Australian native conifer is the Podocarpus alpinus. It's the mountain plum pine, and it's a beauty because it grows about 1 metre high, and as you can see, it sort of spreads out. It does have little red berries on it. It's a beautiful plant for hedging also. And now for something bigger. When it comes to trees, it's conifers that we imagine to be the classic shape. But be sure to take note of the eventual size of the tree that you're planting. Some can grow to over 30 metres tall. This massive Spanish fir, Abies pinsapo aurea, is a beautiful cultivar with golden young foliage that gets darker with age. It grows slightly slower than the normal variety of Spanish fir due to the reduced chlorophyll in the golden form. But it manages to reach a maximum height of 10 metres tall in 30 years. Another golden beauty is the wonderful large golden Himalayan cedar. You can see the decorative tips on its ends. It's a very old cultivar with classic conical habit, and like most conifers, it enjoys full sun and a bit of moisture with well-drained soils. This variety can tolerate hot and humid summers and is drought tolerant once it's established. And last but certainly not least is the Wollemi pine, great in a garden or in a really big pot. And these ancient trees were thought to be extinct millions of years ago until they were discovered in New South Wales in 1994. How extraordinary. Since then, they've become quite popular in cultivation, but still no less exciting to see one. It's in the Oricaceae family, the only member of its genus, the Wallemii. These three are about 4 to 5 metres tall, but they can grow to 40 metres in their natural habitat. So if you want one in your backyard, it needs plenty of space, give it protection from the scorching summer suns and a cool root run. Conifers are truly wondrous and quite beautiful, far more diverse than many people might think. So why not go out and search for some that will suit your garden or your balcony and just learn more about these fascinating plants.
I love it when creatives turn to the natural world for inspiration. Seeing what they pick up and spin into their practice really taps into the feeling we all get as gardeners. Our next story is with a jeweller in WA who's making the connection between ornament and the plant world.
Being in the garden, you're constantly seeing different forms, the shapes of the petals, the veins in the leaves. It all informs what I'm doing in my work. It's just an endless array that you can draw on. I don't think that I will ever get tired of finding something in the garden to inspire some creations in my work. I'm Robin Wells and I'm a contemporary jeweller. I work in Kensington, Perth, on Whadjuk Noongar country, and I draw inspiration from my garden, which is planted mostly with native plants. Where we live, it's only a few k's from the city centre, and it's really close to the Swan River. We're only on a 521 square metre block. When we first moved into this property, well, there was only the one house on the front of the block, and there was a vast area of lawn and sand in the back. So as soon as we saw it, we just knew that it was a blank canvas for us to do whatever we wanted to. And now with councils, they've relaxed a lot of the laws over the years, and so you can plant out your verge, and so that's what we did. And being on a corner has just been fantastic because we've been able to plant everything that we want to. We decided to build a house on the very back of the block and have a central courtyard. My husband's mum and my mum were getting older. We just thought that would give us the opportunity to have a granny flat or something for them to come and live. So at the moment, my mum is living in the front house and my family live in the back house, and it's allowed her to have her space to garden. We've talked about what we're going to plant, and it's been things like aromophillas and acacias, grevilleas, things that are really important to bring in the wildlife and the birds and bees. Willy wagtails are often making an appearance here. She's got the most incredible, vast knowledge, and she's always been interested in gardening and natives, and so I feel very privileged to have that knowledge to be passed on to me, and hopefully for me to pass it on to my children as well.
We might need to try and put some shade cloth over it just until it starts to cool down.
I grew up in North Dandalup, which is about an hour south of Perth, on a farm. We bred Hereford cattle and also Australian cattle dogs. We had a massive veggie garden on the farm as well. Around the farm, there was a lot of jarrah forest and bushland, and so it was always intriguing to see the seed pods and the honky nuts, the leaves, so I was always collecting things and bringing them back home to make little bits and pieces. I really wanted to be an art teacher, and I did about 1.5 years of art teaching at university and just realised that I'd actually fallen in love with metal and decided that maybe art teaching wasn't really for me. So I changed my major to focus on the jewellery and metalsmithing. The course was amazing, and they brought in lots of guest lecturers, and so we were able to try all sorts of different techniques, and it actually just allowed you to think about what you would like to focus on when you finished. Once I started to develop my own style and aesthetic, then the native plants and things, they just really spoke to me, and so pretty much they infiltrate every single thing that I do in my jewellery that I make. I get bored quite easily, so I like to use a broad range of materials. Sterling silver, fine gold, fine silver, also aluminium, stainless steel. The coppers and different steels and things really reflect the native plants in my garden and also on the farm growing up. In fact, I've just planted a plant in our verge called sterling silver acacia. When I saw it at the nursery and it was called sterling silver, I was like, oh my God, I've got to have that and plant that in the verge. So the starting point really for everything that I do is observing and looking at those forms in the garden. The hakea, the fullness of those seed pods and just the texture and the form is just really beautiful. I'm usually photographing something that catches my eye, and then that translates into drawings. Those drawings then morph into a shape that can be translated into jewellery, into wearable pieces. In this particular instance, I'm working with fine silver. I just really love the colour of the metal. It's just a beautiful soft colour that I think reflects back the actual hakea plant. It's overlaid with 24 karat gold, which is an ancient Korean technique, dates back thousands of years, where you roll out gold granules into a very, very fine sheet that's probably 0.014 of a millimetre thick. It's really, really thin. And that allows you to cut out shapes and create little fronds and grass textures and things in the gold and just overlay that onto the silver. So I put the fine silver onto a hot plate. The 24 karat gold gets laid on very carefully into the design that I want, and then it's fixed in place and burnished. I put it through a rolling mill to create a layered texture design. I've got some steel templates that I just place carefully onto the silver piece of jewellery, and that imprints itself into the surface of the metal, creating a really beautiful, almost like a fossil kind of imprint into the metal. Then all the edges need to be filed down and then edges sanded to make them nice and smooth. And then forming in a doming block where you just hammer it out to give it that really nice rounded form. And then finally putting the finding on to make it a finished piece of jewellery. It's really amazing, and I feel so privileged to have my studio, my mum living in the space, our family in the back. All those elements have just been brought together. I can look out into the garden from my studio, and looking at all the plants, it does bring you a sense of peace and happiness. I feel very, very lucky.
Okay, tools up. It's time for your jobs for the weekend. And remember, a job begun is a job half done. Cool climate gardeners who like greens with a bit of grunt, why not try a crop of Mizuna? It's got a mustardy kick and its ferny leaves look awesome too. Create an oil bath for your tools. Simply fill a bucket with sand, mix in some old oil, and it will keep rust at bay. Rake in some of the garden gold that is fallen leaves. Add them to your compost or pile them up separately to make leaf mould. In warm temperate areas, it's strawberry planting time. Bare-rooted types are available over winter, or beg some runners from a friend. If you're drowning in a lovely crop of lemons, give preserving a go. Cut lemons in quarters, smother in salt, pack them into a jar with some spices and top with lemon juice. Harvest horseradish while it's dormant over winter. The pungent roots make an awesome sauce. It can take over gardens, so keep it contained in pots. In the subtropics, get blades sharpened before the spring growth hits. Get lawnmower blades done, as well as secateurs, loppers and shears. Move established shrubs that aren't thriving where they are to see if they grow better in a different spot. Plant broad beans now so they finish growing before the warm weather hits. Soak seeds overnight before planting to speed up germination, and stake to protect from winds. In the tropics, it's time to fertilise fruit trees to give them a boost before flowering. If they're already flowering, use a low nitrogen soil conditioner such as compost. Take cuttings from cassava leaves as they start to yellow. Choose thicker brown stems, cut into 30 centimetre long pieces, and simply lay flat and cover with soil to grow next year's crop. Plant sweet corn now. Choose a sheltered spot to avoid any damage from high winds. In arid areas, now's a good time to plant kohlrabi, a type of brassica that is grown for its delicious swollen stem. Time to feed your soil. Build up beds with manure and compost to prepare your garden for spring planting. How about considering a citrus? The cool, crispy nights are perfect for turning blood oranges a gorgeous shade of red. So why not plant one in your patch? Have a ripper weekend in the garden, and don't forget, you can always head to our YouTube channel for all sorts of gardening goodness anytime. Well, that's it for another week. But before I go, I want to congratulate Organic Gardener magazine on its 25th birthday. The magazine was founded by the late, great Peter Cundall, and its 150th edition is out now, a real collector's copy. Happy birthday to you! Here's what's coming up on next week's show. And so see all of us. And so see all of us.
I'm visiting wild and beautiful Bruny Island off Tasmania's southeast coast to take a look at some of the vital work being done to try to protect some of Australia's most vulnerable bird species.
Are you down in the dumps because the garden at your rental home is nothing more than a small, shady, rather barren, uninspiring place? Well, chin up, because I've got the garden for you.
And we meet a man with a passion for an ancient horticultural skill.